Hello, everybody. This is Chris Sturgis, and I am delighted to welcome you today to CompetencyWorks webinar on aligning competencies with the Common Core. We've got some great speakers from Jobs of the Future and Boston Day and Evening Academy, who you will meet in a little bit later. But first, I wanted to give you a little background for those of you who are new to CompetencyWorks. CompetencyWorks is a project of the International Association for K-12 Online Learning, and Susan Patrick would be here today, the president of iNACOL, but she's on jury duty, so I get to do her piece. iNACOL is a nonprofit organization with over 4,000 members focused on student-centered new learning models using online and blended learning that are competency-based. iNACOL's #1 policy priority is moving away from seat time to competency education, supporting policies and practices that provide more effective learning for students. iNACOL is pleased to partner on the CompetencyWorks project with so many terrific organizations. We could not do this work without our partners, American Youth Policy Forum, National Governors Association, and Jobs of the Future, and our terrific advisory boards. You can find them on the CompetencyWorks website. We'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the leadership of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. They have been an outstanding partner, and their leadership, creativity, and willingness to take risks is exemplary. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. So now a little bit about CompetencyWorks. We're dedicated to creating a virtual learning space for those of you advancing competency education across the country. As you probably know, you can find blog posts written by students, teachers, principals, consultants, and state leaders sharing what they're learning. And if any of you want to join in and make a contribution, we would love it. We periodically write briefing papers on topics that are of high interest. 2 will be coming out in the next month, 1 on state policy and 1 on information management systems. And we offer the Competency-Based Pathways Wiki so that you can find additional resources when you need them. So here's the key here. Right here, this blue button is how you find the wiki. This webinar will be archived there, and you can find resources related to this webinar, so you can even go there now if you'd like. You might want to create a tab. Let's see. So during this webinar, we highly encourage you to use the chat room. We really want peers to meet each other, and if you're meeting each other in a chat room, that's just as great as if you're meeting each other in a conference. Please introduce yourself and say where you're from and your interest in competency education. For all you know, somebody over at the next school next to you working on something very similar is in the chat room, and we want to make sure that peers are finding each other. Feel free to ask questions in the chat room, comment, refer people to other resources, and talk about how your work is developing. All of you are incredibly knowledgeable, and we want to make sure we're drawing on your knowledge as well as our presenters. Oh, and also, everybody always asks at the end, the chat room is also archived, and we can make a link to that as well. There's 2 points in the presentation that we're going to pause and respond to questions. What we're going to do is have either Rob or myself will ask the panelists the questions. So just go ahead and put your questions in the chat room. And finally, this webinar is the first of 4 webinars based on Making Mastery Work, a close-up view of competency education by Nora Priest, Antonio Rudenstein, and Ephraim Weinstein, produced with the support of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation and the Gates Foundation. The project was initiated to learn more about proficiency education, and in 2011, 10 high schools in New England, very different approaches, were funded to enhance their competency-based models and participate in the research project. The book's fantastic. It highlights the different approaches, and you get a real sense of the different design choices people are making. As a complementary project, JSF worked with Boston Day and Evening Academy to document how they're aligning competencies to rigorous standards for off-track youth, the topic of today's webinar. So, one last thing before we get started. Let's take a minute to reorient ourselves around the definition of competency education. As you know, states and schools are using different language to talk about competency education. Some proficiency-based, mastery-based, standards-based, performance-based. So it's very important that we have a shared definition. In front of you is the definition that CompetencyWorks uses based on input from innovators in the field. Regardless of what we call it, what's most important is that we are sharing a commitment to helping students reach proficiency with adequate time and support. In the current system, we allow too many students to progress without the skills they need, and others are held back. So this definition is driving us towards quality, a sense of quality focused on equity. And each of the elements are important. Just doing one doesn't mean you're competency-based. It means that you're emerging as a competency-based model. But really you have to try to implement all 5. Now, if this is the first time you've seen this definition, please ask questions in the chat room, or if you go to the wiki, there's a more detailed explanation, or I'd be happy after that webinar to always try to help folks better understand this. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have an incredible panel today to talk about their experience in designing competency-based education for students that are over age and undercredited. I'm going to now turn this over to Rebecca Wolf, Senior Program Manager at Jobs for the Future and the author of the report, Aligning Competencies to Rigorous Standards for Off-Track Youth. Jobs for the Future offers an enormous knowledge bank on issues related to competency education, and if you haven't taken a look, you'll want to check out Students at the Center and Back on Track, as they are particularly valuable, and you can find the links on the wiki. If you go to the wiki page for this webinar, I've put those links there. So, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. I assume you'll write in the chat box if you're not hearing me well enough. So as Chris just mentioned, Jobs for the Future is a national nonprofit that for 30 years has been working to develop innovative solutions to dramatically increase the number of low-income youth who achieve some kind of post-secondary success. And the work I'm here to introduce today that we did with Boston Day and Evening Academy is part of another larger Nellie Mae Education Foundation and Jobs for the Future effort, which, as Chris just said, is called Students at the Center. And we'll show you the website to access the research, resources, and knowledge base that we've been building for that at the end. And all of that is available for free, and I would be remiss if I also didn't plug the fact that we'll be coming out with a book called Anytime, Anywhere that's about student-centered learning this spring from Harvard Education Press. But to today's topic, through our partnership with BDEA, we documented their alignment process and helped them launch the first real institute, which Allison and Beatrice will talk a lot more about in a moment or two. So before I turn it over to them, the main event, I just want to point out 3 key lessons that we found in the process of putting together the paper with them. So the first is being savvy about standards. There's a lot of talk and concern and work happening around the Common Core State Standards right now, or non-Common Core State Standards if you are in a non-Common Core state. And what we've found through working with BDEA's process is it's really important to seek as much information as you can from your district and from your state to really understand what's truly required within the standards. And given that, being willing to push on the boundaries within those guidelines, because you might just be surprised that you have more flexibility than you think. And that's really important as you start to develop a competency-based platform. Secondly, get savvy also, and how you get creative about how you're going to offer a fuller complement of courses if you're a small school, and really think strategically about your partners with web-based providers, community colleges, community internships, but always think about how they tie back to your competencies. So you're not tacking on extra work, but you're helping your students meet the benchmarks and competencies they need to be. And finally, what Chris actually in a blog so aptly called naming the elephant, we really have to be taking care of this elephant. We need to be tackling head-on the question of how we get low-skilled, very off-track students the education they need. BDEA has come up with one solution, or several I should say, as they pulled out their competency-based system. And one of the things they have done is offered middle school and even grade school benchmarks to high school students, and being willing to accept the limits of how far and fast they're going to be able to push those students forward. So you'll hear more about each of these pieces and why they made the hard decisions they've made from Allison and Beatrice, who are 2 of the primary drivers behind BDEA's instructional excellence. So first, Beatrice will provide an overview of the school. Beatrice Zapater has held the administrative positions at BDEA since 2007, and she's been head of the school since 2009. She's been a pilot school program developer and coach at the Center for Collaborative Ed. And this past October, Beatriz was given the very first Larry O'Toole Award by Nellie Mae in recognition of her leadership and innovation in advancing student-centered approaches to learning. It was an inspiring day, if I can just editorialize a tiny bit. So then Allison Remick will follow with a two-part discussion of how they went about the alignment process. So she'll first outline for you how they did the process, and then she's going to talk more about that issue I just mentioned of how they tackled one of the toughest education conundrums of our time. How do we recover low-skilled, off-track students, provide them a rich education that's aligned with the Common Core, and graduate them quickly and college-ready? So Allison has been with BDEA since 2004 as one of the day program's founding science teachers. In 2008, after completing her principal training, she was hired as Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Her facilitation of the instructional leadership team has helped bring clarity to the school's competency-based model, garnering the school and her work significant national attention. So we're so lucky to be able to hear directly today from Beatriz and Allison as they describe their work and the hard decisions they've made. So I'm going to turn the mic to Beatriz and Allison.
Hello everybody, thank you so much for joining us. I am the proud head of school at Boston Day and Evening Academy, and I would like to provide some context and information about the school. In 1997, Boston Day and Evening Academy, BDEA, was founded, and in 1998, we received status as a Horace Mann charter school within the Boston Public Schools to fully implement our mission. As you will see from this abbreviated mission statement, we work exclusively with students who are overage and off track. And as our name implies, we do this through a very flexible schedule that spans from 9 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening. Who are our students? This is a lovely photo of some of our students. The majority of our students are 16 to 23 years old, with an average age being 18. All are 2+ grades behind in reading and math. And although we see a range of skills in math and reading between the 3rd and the 12th grade, 1/3 of our students are in the 3rd or 5th grade range. All of our students experience some form of trauma, and all 370 students considered off track by leading and lagging indicators, meaning attendance, course completion, failure in state assessments. These 3 quotes are an illustration of what our students have said in their own words as they went to advocate on behalf of the school for a more equitable budget last year. As you will see, not only can they advocate for themselves as learners, but also on behalf of the school. These 3 quotes really illustrate how our students have taken ownership of their education, something that Allison will be talking about, how transparency equals ownership. So these are some of the results over the last 2 years. The graduation, we graduated between 75 and 90 students each of the last 2 years, and we do this in 4 graduations per year. 83% of our students graduate in 3 years or less. And that is at the time that students enter the school. So we basically set the clock when they begin their education here at Boston Day and Evening Academy. 72 to 83% of the graduates enroll in college after graduating. As you will see, BDEA continues to support students through our transition program 9 months after graduation, which means that we ensure that every single student who has graduated from BDEA has a post-secondary planning program and that they have implemented that program. As time or Carnegie units do not drive the academic development of students, this number of graduates represents how long it has taken students to graduate from the time they arrived at BDEA. We, however, continue supporting students for the time being. Now I'd like to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Alison Remick, the Director of Instruction and Curriculum at Boston Day and Evening Academy.
Hello, everyone. If you cannot hear me, please go ahead and write something in the chat room. Thank you all for your interest in competency-based work and for joining us today. We're excited to see the growing interest in this work because we believe it to be crucial in any discussion of student achievement and the larger discussion of school reform. There's a lot to cover here, so I'm going to dive right in. But I want to let you know that I'm going to break for questions after about 10 minutes and then leave more time for questions at the end. Okay, so the implications of preparing our students at BDA to demonstrate what the Common Core has identified as college and career readiness has certainly generated a lot of questions for our staff over the past few years. This is a reality check for us as much as you. I believe as a school we're on the right track, and we're grateful to have some new perspectives today to help shape our practice, so thank you for joining us. The goal for this conversation is to share how BDA, a competency-based school, started the process of aligning our curriculum, instruction, and assessment to the expectations of the Mass Common Core, which for us is still a work in process. We will also share with you what we see as significant implications and hurdles for our student population as we continue our alignment to the Common Core. This will then lead us into the second part of the presentation, describing the strategies and best practices that address these implications, hopefully giving everyone some tools and ideas to best prepare students to be successful in their postgraduate plan. So some of these strategies, in fact, are just realizing and supporting the intrinsic qualities of being a competency-based school. But I hope we can give those, in a traditional model, some ideas that will be easy for them to implement. So first, what do we, the staff at BDA, see as the difference between a standard and a competency? At BDA, we define competency as an enduring understanding of the content and skill a student needs in a specific discipline. Each competency is relevant and necessary for future learning. The first part of this definition is enduring understanding. We define this as the key understandings and skills a student needs to have and demonstrate in a specific discipline. These enduring understandings build upon each other so they are necessary for future learning. For example, in a for a humanities student, they must demonstrate that they can write a 5-paragraph essay before they move on to the next class, which takes them through the steps to write an analytical paper, which then leads them into a class that teaches them how to write a research paper. Unlike a traditional model, a competency-based model requires the student to demonstrate the skill before advancing to the next set of skills. Our competencies are designed for our specific student population, students who are 2 or more years older than their grade level and at least 2 years behind grade level academically in reading and math. All of our students have struggled in traditional educational models due to poor academic skills and/or factors related to poverty. As a result, they lack academic confidence and self-esteem. Despite these challenges, we have developed a set of competencies that prepares our students to pass our state assessment on the first attempt, as well as prepares students to be successful in college or career training programs. What makes our competencies different from the state standards is that they do not include every state standard. They can't. Given where our students start academically, we cannot teach each standard. Instead, during their time with us, using a variety of resources, we have identified what we believe are the essential skills that build upon each other as we prepare students to be successful in their postgraduate plan. With the Common Core now in the picture, our goal is to make sure these competencies are aligned to the new set of frameworks and that our instructional practice supports all students' ability to demonstrate the skill and content using the level of rigor required of the assessments. Once we are done with this process, we will have ultimately identified the core of the core, the essential skills and knowledge that resonate throughout these standards. Another significant difference between standards and BDEA competencies is the language in which they're written. It's important for our staff to have competencies that state clearly what the student should be demonstrating in a language that's accessible for the student and teachers to understand. Here's an example of an ELA anchor standard and its complementary BDEA competency. You can see that the language is clear and transparent, so each teacher and student knows precisely what is expected of them. Similar to the Common Core, BDEA competencies are broken down into more specific measurable standards, which we call benchmarks. These benchmarks identify the skill and knowledge the student must understand and demonstrate in order to show mastery. At BDEA, the benchmarks are scaffolded to build students' academic confidence and to allow for multiple entry points based on the skill level for each student. The text highlighted in blue and red are the benchmarks students work on in their writing class at BDEA. Some students may start the class not knowing how to write a meal paragraph, a middle school standard. Here's where the competency model begins to delineate itself from traditional models. Instead of having all students start from the same place, this class will provide resources and time to ensure all students can demonstrate those first few benchmarks essential to writing a strong argumentative essay. Other students will demonstrate this with ease, so they may be working on 2C, creating an outline to write the 5-paragraph essay. Once students demonstrate these benchmarks independently, they will move on to the next course, which works on the next set of benchmarks shown in black. Students will have multiple opportunities to demonstrate this competency so that by the time they reach advanced lit, they can demonstrate it with the complexity and rigor required of the Common Core. So I think about this a lot, and at this point, what I see as the ultimate difference between standards and competencies is that competency education allows students to demonstrate depth of understanding versus breadth of knowledge. We know that today, content is easily accessible using technology. So our focus needs to shift to asking students to demonstrate how to access, evaluate, think critically, and apply new knowledge. If they are spending their time learning to memorize lists of content, we are not giving them the opportunity to use higher order thinking skills. This is particularly important when working with a population that is overage for high school. An added bonus is that competencies and benchmarks serve as the framework for teaching, which creates the space for teachers to develop creative, relevant, and engaging curriculum, as well as authentic assessments that require students to demonstrate the depth of their learning. With proper guidance and support, learning becomes rigorous and students are asked to think deeply and reflect. So how do we identify the core of the core? First, this is a work in progress. I think watching the work coming out of the consortiums who are developing the high-stake assessments of the Common Core, particularly looking at those sample test questions, will give us greater insight as to how the Common Core will impact our instructional practice. Before we even began the process of aligning our competencies to the Common Core, I worked with teachers on 2 exercises. First, we talked about what works well academically at BDEA. We reminded one another of our school's mission and the needs of the students that we serve. This was important because, as I mentioned earlier, our instructional practice had been successful with this student population, and I wanted to make sure our teachers acknowledged their strengths as educators and not see this as a change, not to see this change as an upheaval, of all that they had accomplished in the past 12 years. I was also clear that if we identified areas in need of significant improvement, we would find a way to implement these changes slowly over the next few years. So here's our process. Our first step was to become knowledgeable about the Common Core, as Rebecca said. Who had written these new standards? What was the reason behind the changes? What were the significant changes from our current standards to the new Common Core? This led us to the painstaking work itself, going through each Common Core standard and aligning it to our competencies and our benchmarks, essentially creating a side-by-side analysis. We kept track of our work using a simple Excel spreadsheet that identified each Common Core standard, its corresponding benchmark, and matched it to the BDEA competency. If we did not have a competency or benchmark for a particular Common Core anchor standard, we left it blank, and you can see here on this diagram. Completing this first step was truly an enlightening experience for all of us, as it was the first time in many years that we had taken the time to explore how our competencies align to the state standards. For schools that do not have competencies, I would think the process would be similar. Teachers could do this alignment with their curriculum maps. Which Common Core standards are they teaching, and which ones are they not? They should also evaluate the level of complexity or depth of knowledge at which they assess each of the standards they teach in that course. Are they asking students to recall, demonstrate skill, think strategically, or apply their learning? This would allow them to determine which standards get more attention than others, essentially identifying the competencies for that course. Once our content teams created the side-by-side, they took it back to their department for a larger conversation. Which standards were missing? Should they be added to the BDEA Individualized Learning Plan, or ILP as we call it? And the most challenging question for us, do we continue to include the lower grade level standards? Teachers engaged in rich conversations about which standards should be included or justified why we were okay with not including them. It was in these conversations that the tension between breadth of standards and the distinct needs of our student population surfaced, and teachers were faced with the tough decisions about how to distill the Common Core, allowing for a framework that reflected the academic needs of our students. Once teachers came to agreement, they made the necessary revisions to their list of competencies and benchmarks. This first part, aligning the standards with competencies, while painstakingly detailed, was actually just the beginning of identifying and realizing the fuller implications of the Common Core. The next phase, the revision of the curriculum, instruction, and assessment, is where we are now in our work and really illuminates the significant changes we must make to ensure that our students are ready for any standards-based high-stakes assessment test. Personally, I'm still getting a handle on how the Common Core will ultimately impact our student population. But in the same way that our summative course assessments identify what the instructor truly believes is essential, so too will our high-stake Common Core assessment. Reviewing these test questions, we will see what the creators of the Common Core deem as the core of the core. What skills are our students required to demonstrate? How well are we teaching those skills? Where do we need to improve? How does this change our instructional practice? Some of the overarching implications of the Common Core are: the first implication of the Common Core is the increased demand to demonstrate strong reading and writing skills using a variety of texts, informational and figurative, in addition to demonstrating complex thinking. Not harder or more difficult questions, but more complex questions. A tool that has helped our teachers assess how well we are preparing students for complex thinking is Webb's Depth of Knowledge Guide. This is a reference similar to Bloom's taxonomy, easily found on the internet. This provides the framework by which teachers can assess the depth of knowledge they are asking students to demonstrate on the variety of assessments they use in their class. Perhaps the most significant issue unveiled for us by translating the Common Core into competencies was our math dilemma. How do we mediate between what the Common Core says is college ready, Algebra 2, and the reality of our students' skills? Our math team believes that the essential math skills that our students need begins with a strong math fluency, along with the strong math habits and practices. The team was excited to see these habits outlined in the Common Core called the Standards for Mathematical Practice. However, there is no question that we also need to build more advanced level math into our scope and sequence. Will it get us to Algebra 2? Should it get our students through Algebra 2? We're not sure. Despite our annual shrinking public school budget allocation, we have managed to find creative ways to address our math dilemma by including online courses and by utilizing our dual enrollment program with local colleges for students coming to us with more advanced math skills. So this is our work so far as we try to understand the new Common Core standards, its implication for our practice, and our goal of making sure all of our standards have the skills to be successful in post-graduation. Before we move on to the specific strategies that BDEA is using to help off-track students in this new era of Common Core standards, we want to give you all an opportunity to comment on pieces that you've heard here that might resonate, or share your own experience with competency-based learning, or to just ask questions. Chris, how should we start this process for questions?
Hi, so this is Chris. We've gotten 2 or 3 of the same type of questions. So it breaks into 2 parts. How does BDEA track your students after they leave your school to know if they're being successful in college or post-secondary education? And the other part of that question is, how do you measure success after school? Allison or Beatrice?
Okay, great question. So we started a transition year program 3 years ago, which means that we have a staff member dedicated to actually tracking progress of our students. And progress we define as someone who has in the process of implementing their postgraduate plan, which is one of the requirements for graduating from BDEA. We actually start this activity of planning for postgraduate as soon as the student enters Boston Day and Evening Academy. Our postgraduate planning coordinator immediately meets with students at Seminar, which is the program that serves as an orientation for incoming students. And we immediately begin to assess goals, interests, areas that they might want to explore after graduating. And our transition year coordinator begins to really formally work with the students 1 full trimester before students graduate during the period that we call capstone, when students are preparing their final capstone presentation. And for 9 months, they check in every year. We check in with their college courses. We check in with wherever they're doing career training. And we also have our student support team that helps us identify students who we're not able to get in touch with for whatever reasons. And we do home visits. So our tracking systems are very solid. And with something that we want to expand on, because we want to be able to have a longitudinal study of how students are doing 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years out of college.
And if I can just add something, Chris. Another thing that we do is we look at where our students are going. Are they going into remedial courses or into credit-bearing courses? And each year, this transition coordinator gives us the data of the number of students that are doing which in ELA and math. And I think that information has been really helpful for us as the departments continue to elevate their rigor and their alignment with the Common Core.
Great. And there's another question about if you maintain a database and with this type of information, but why don't we open up that question a little bit. Could you talk about the type of information systems that you have to support the school in general as well as the transition to post-secondary?
So in terms of tracking academics, we use a system called EASE, E-A-S-E, and that is where it's separate from our student information system, which is PowerSchool. So PowerSchool is our demographics and our SIMS data, our schedule, and our attendance. And then we designed another system called EASE to track students' progress on their benchmarks. And that's something that the teachers and students have access to. It has a lot of visuals that I'm going to actually later on in this presentation show you a piece of that system. Do you want to talk, Beatrice, about transition?
Yes, transition year. So in transition year, it's in a number of ways that we track our students and enter the data in a database. The transition year coordinator is part of a larger network called Teen Futures, which is funded by a local foundation. And they work with Brandeis University to develop a database that actually measures students' social and emotional growth and personal growth, really largely based on 21st century skills. So we have that database, which we share with all the other partners in the Teen Futures Network. At the same time, BDEA has been really focused on establishing a vibrant alumni association. And every time a student walks in the building, which is every day, who graduated, maybe not just last year, but 10 years ago, we have staff who actually enter and update their contact information, where they are, and what other support do they need, and how they can stay connected, not just to the school, but with each other, to form a network, a professional network.
I'll just, I'd like to verbalize a question that Rebecca just put in the chat room. Our learning management system, one of our challenges, and if people have solutions to this, is we do not have a really good scheduling system for a competency-based program. And in the second part, I'm going to talk about how we accelerate learning and the learning management system to support it, the technology to support it. I've not yet found the perfect solution to it.
Okay, Allison, why don't you dive into the second part? That'd be great. Just keeping an eye on time.
All right. So, while the first section was sharing our framework for our competency-based program, the goal of the second part is to quickly outline some of the systems and structures that put students at the center of learning. When a school can achieve this goal, students ultimately transition from that position of low motivation to being empowered to own their learning. For me, I think this was most evident this past October during a 3-day visit by BDEA's rechartering team. On the second day of the review, a student panel was asked by the visiting team, "Who's in charge here?" Our students never shy to jump right in. Some of them said it was head of school. Others mentioned her by name, Beatrice. But one finally said, "We are." When the facilitator asked her for clarification, others chimed in to explain that they, the students, are the ones in charge of their education at BDEA. The answer, "we are," is the essence of what it means to be a competency-based school. The responsibility of owning his or her learning is placed on the student. When we make student learning transparent with systems and structures that meet students where they are academically, not based on age or grade level, and allow them to progress at their own pace as they demonstrate mastery of skill rather than seat time and accumulation of credit, I believe we've delivered a system that empowers students to take responsibility for their learning. So our dilemma is similar to that of many of you participating in this presentation. How do we fill gaps to bring students to grade level and be college and career ready in a short period of time? The first step, as described earlier, is the development of competencies that address the academic needs of your students while serving your school's mission. The second step is creating a system that supports mastery, common language, clear expectations, an assessment system that promotes mastery, and a professional learning community that supports teachers and students to do great work. A competency-based program is rooted in the idea that students are working at their learning edge. The work is not too hard or too easy. But in order to actualize this pedagogy, you need a system that supports meeting students where they are academically. I believe that BDEA has been able to achieve success with students not because we have a perfect set of competencies, we will likely be tinkering with them for years, but because we have a system that works for our teachers and students, a system that is transparent, consequently providing teachers and students ownership of teaching and learning. The first part of the system is for staff to clarify and define their academic language. What does it mean to be competent in your school? What does that word mean? Furthermore, how will you measure it for each benchmark? How will you make sure it is consistent as your students move from class to class? We also felt it was important to come to an agreement as a learning community about language and norms, and so removed language that was not appropriate for our school. We use not yet, competent, instead of fail. We do not need grade levels if students are placed in courses based on skill and content knowledge. We spent time talking about rubrics and what they should look like. How do we define each benchmark and how do we use them with students? Departments created goals aligned to our school-wide goals, but the goals were specific to where that department was in developing consistency across their curriculum. For example, all departments are asked to use department time to look at student work to develop consistent expectations across their department. Math is using this time to see how the standards of mathematical practice can be incorporated into their practice, looking at student work and teacher assessments. However, humanities teachers use this time to see how they can scaffold writing into more courses. Once we had some common understanding around language, we next needed to build an assessment system that promoted mastery, developing a process that was transparent to teachers and students. We've been honing the system over the last several years, and I believe these adjustments are what has transformed our student culture to one that puts students in charge of their learning. We enroll students year-round, and students enter our school in cohorts at the start of each trimester, not any day of the week, month, or year as previously done. Before this first day in class, they participate in a week-long orientation that transitions into a trimester-long seminar course. All of the courses at BDEA are about 11 weeks, which included a class in each content area. During this time, using a multitude of assessments, external, internal, traditional, and experiential, teachers assess student skill and content knowledge. After seminar, teachers place students in classes appropriate to their skill level. Some students may need to repeat a course that they had passed in a previous high school, while others may be given credit for courses they had previously failed in past schools due to poor attendance. Once students are placed in appropriate content classes based on skill, not age or grade level, they must demonstrate the competencies attached to that course before they can advance to the next course. BDEA works on a trimester system with each trimester lasting 11 weeks. So here is an example of our roadmap. The roadmap is a crucial element in student ownership, and this is part of our e-system that I mentioned earlier. It's a visual representation of exactly where they are on the road towards graduation, and it is created for them every trimester. Every 11 weeks, based on performance, a student either advances or repeats the course, continuing where they left off. In some cases, they may advance in math, but not humanities or science. A new schedule is created for the student each trimester based on their progress. Here again, students feel the effects of their work or not. Tools like these help teachers make learning transparent in the classroom. Course syllabi, weekly assignments, assessments, and rubrics clearly identify the competencies being covered. Charts fill many of the classrooms with visual representation of the students' progress on their competencies. And finally, the systems we have created could not exist and be put into action if we did not value the importance of creating time to support our teachers and students to do great work. This work is tough. As a school, our culture is only as strong as our professional learning community. The students are always watching. We make sure we give time for our teachers to practice the same habits we ask of our students: inquiry, collaboration, and reflection. The last piece that is essential to our competency-based system is our advisory model. When you eliminate grade levels, it is important for students to realize where they are in the pathway to graduation. Advisors hold conferences with students at least 3 times a year, many times more often than that, based on their progress each trimester. This is a time to discuss successes, struggles, and to set goals for the next trimester. Advisory is the place for students, often disenfranchised from education, to connect to the school community, and through this reflection and goal setting, they can begin to take ownership of their pathway to graduation. So we've shared a lot today, and I hope that those of you who have been curious about competency-based education might feel more comfortable by the prospect of digging deeper into this work. In closing, everything we've created at BDEA has been a direct response to the needs of our students. From the language we have created to the length of our courses, from an assessment system that measures their skill, not what's on their transcript. All of this has been a direct fix to a system that was not motivating students to take ownership of their learning. When our students say they're in charge, I know we're doing, I think we're on the right track. All right, so that's it, Chris. Would you like to jump in now and see if there's more questions?
Allison, you have done a great job. Yes, there's a couple questions, and one I'm trying to understand the question, so bear with me. How do you ensure rigor and align with course competence?
Okay, I think I
that allows you to generalize outside of BDEA in terms of students being able to apply their learning to other contexts and locations.
Chris, you're kind of going in and out of that question, but it sounded like, how do you, could you just repeat it? I got the beginning about.
Yes, sorry. How do you ensure rigor and align with the course competencies in a way that allows for the generalization of the skills outside of BDEA, so that the students, you're making sure that the students can apply what they're learning to other situations and contexts?
So that's a great question, and I think you know, educators in general would love to be perfect at that, because that's what we're in the business of doing in terms of education. I think there's a couple of ways that we approach it. I'm not going to say that we're good at this, but a couple of ways. First of all, we ensure rigor through our rubrics. And that's something that I'm really working hard with our staff to utilize, and that the rubric itself identifies, the rubric incorporates that rigor. We use the habits of mind, and we actually incorporate that language into the rubric. And so when a student uses the habit of mind, relevance, connections, using evidence, exploring perspective, exploring possibilities, the teacher in the class is asking the student to take their learning outside of the class and apply it. And so that's one way, is incorporating the habits of mind, incorporating it into their assessments, taking the basic skill and designing a project or an assessment that asks the student to apply it. The other thing that we're doing as a school that I think really excites our teachers and our students is experiential learning. We received a grant probably 7 years ago to help bring kind of that outward bound experience into the urban classroom. And that has been a really incredible opportunity for teachers to not necessarily take the students physically out of the classroom, but to take them out of the classroom in terms of their learning, again, making those connections to outside issues and problems. I hope that answers it. I mean, Beatrice is also pointing to the fact of talking about Project Month is every December we stop what we're doing and students sign up for a project that they need to take based on interest and a certain set of competencies. And that's another great time where class to class stops and students go out into the community and apply their learning with the coaching of teachers. Does that answer that, Chris? Chris? Here, use your thing.
Chris, did that answer the question? We can't hear you. This is Beatrice. Chris, we can't hear it.
So we seem to have lost Chris Sturgis for the moment, so until she recovers from whatever technical difficulties given. Are there additional questions that anyone has for our speakers?
And Beatrice, this is Rebecca. I saw an interesting question go by on the chat about whether students get to influence the competencies and benchmarks themselves or just their own personal education pathway.
So I think from what I've been learning about different competency-based programs, I think ours is a little bit different in terms of when we're working with off-track students with some significant skill development that needs to take place, we identify those benchmarks that are going to lead them to the demonstration of the competency. I know that some schools will start off with these larger competencies and then allow more of a creative process for how the student is going to demonstrate those competencies. And I'll have to say that we do not do that. We have a set of benchmarks, and our benchmarks you'll see in the language are really clear and measurable. And it's really that skill building that our students need, and that and what we try to practice is a gradual release. So by the time they get to their advanced level courses, they're working on those benchmarks independently. But if I understand that question correctly, there's not a lot of freedom for them to rewrite the benchmarks.
So this is something that our students do, is that they have choice on how they're going to demonstrate some of the benchmarks with the guidance of a teacher, and also what else they can bring into it as their own experience to demonstrate that they have mastered the benchmark.
Another question that came in through the text chat box has to do with how you train your teachers for your unique model, and wondering if you retain teachers at a similar rate as other schools in your school district.
So I just advanced the slide, and I think Chris needs us to advance these slides as well, it looks like. But our training, we have an institute that we run every summer. This is going to be our third summer that we'll be running it. It's the second week in July that we train teachers and administrators on how we implement a competency-based program for off-track youth. In terms of mentoring our new teachers that come in, we do a lot of in-house PD, sharing best practices, teaming them up with more experienced teachers. But to be honest, it's a really simple system for a new teacher to walk in. Most of our teachers feel really supported, and that what we're doing is nothing too outrageously alternative. When I talk to people and teachers about this, it's what good teaching is we actually have honed down this long list of standards and said, okay, here's what's essential. Now create something really engaging and relevant and exciting that can bring it to life for our students. And giving that freedom to the teachers, and then letting them have access to all the different curriculum options, they usually don't need a lot of support in terms of how to do this. I think the key is creating that system, that system of structures that I spoke of in the second part. And that's really the school's role, the administrator's role, and the instructional leadership team is how is your school going to create that movement for students.